Not all manipulation feels like violence. Sometimes it feels like comfort, like care, like someone who knows exactly what to say to make you stay. The manipulator isn't always cruel. They're persuasive, charming, strategic. They know how to smile while taking your freedom. And they know how to keep their hands clean, because you'll do the damage to yourself. This is not about obvious villains. This is about the ones who say, "I love you," while pulling strings behind your back. The ones who hurt you, but somehow make you feel like it was your fault. This is the terrifying psychology of a manipulator. And Carl Jung warned us, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. The manipulator avoids themselves by controlling others, and the first tool they use is guilt. Let's go to the beginning. Most manipulators don't start out evil. They start out afraid. Fear is their origin story. Fear of abandonment, fear of being powerless, fear of being seen and rejected. Somewhere along the way, they realized something dark but effective. If they could control how you feel, they could control what you do. They learned to weaponize their pain, to use your empathy against you, to twist the narrative just enough so you question yourself, while they stay untouchable. Carl Jung believed that the manipulator is often someone disconnected from their own shadow, the repressed, unowned parts of their psyche. They don't see themselves as controlling. They see themselves as just trying to protect, or just doing what's best. That's what makes them dangerous, because they don't think they're manipulating. They think they're saving. Let's talk about tactics, because manipulation doesn't look like a horror movie. It looks like everyday life. They guilt trip you for setting boundaries. They gaslight you into questioning your memory. They use silence as punishment. They play the victim when you call them out. They make you believe you're the one who's selfish. And the worst part? They never raise their voice. They raise your doubt. You start apologizing for things you didn't do. You start over-explaining yourself. You start shrinking, tiptoeing, wondering, did I really mess up? Or am I just overreacting? That's when they know they have you. Not in chains, but in confusion. Not through fear, but through emotional erosion. Jung said, "The most dangerous things are not what we see, but what we don't." And manipulation thrives in the unseen, in the space between words, in the guilt between conversations. Let's go deeper. The manipulator doesn't want your love. They want your obedience. They want your dependency. They want to be the center of your emotional world, so that they never have to face the emptiness of their own. That's the dark root of it all. They don't manipulate because they're powerful. They manipulate because they're hollow. Control becomes their personality, because underneath, they feel like they're nothing. And here's the irony. Manipulators often seem confident, composed, even spiritual. They know how to appear wise, gentle, or even vulnerable. But every story they tell has one goal: to keep you where they want you. And what do they fear most? They fear exposure. They fear you waking up and seeing through them. Because once the illusion breaks, they lose the power of ambiguity. They can't say, "You're being dramatic," when you now say, "No, I'm finally seeing clearly." They can't pretend to be the victim when you now hold the mirror up. That's why they react with rage or withdrawal when you push back. They're not just angry, they're terrified. Let's talk about emotional currency. The manipulator builds a system where your worth is always being measured. They do one kind act, then hold it over your head. They remember every mistake you made and forget every time you forgave them. They love bomb you after hurting you, so you feel like maybe it was just a bad moment. And slowly, you become addicted to their approval, addicted to the apology, addicted to the nice version of them that shows up right after the abuse. It's not love, it's psychological conditioning. And the longer you stay, the more you feel responsible for their feelings. Jung would call this a toxic fusion, where your identity becomes entangled with their shadow. And now, you're not just being manipulated. You're starting to manipulate yourself. You justify their cruelty. You ignore your own pain. You rewrite reality to keep the peace. Let me say this clearly. If someone makes you feel unsafe for speaking your truth, they are not your safe space. If someone uses love to control you, that is not love. That is bondage wrapped in affection. And if someone always makes you the villain, while playing the victim every time they hurt you, you are not in a relationship. You are in a power trap. Carl Jung believed that healing begins when the unconscious becomes conscious. So what's the truth beneath all this? The manipulator fears their own helplessness. They fear being left. They fear being unimportant. So they cling, control, guilt trip, gaslight, anything to avoid sitting alone with their own reflection. But here's the plot twist. The only way out, for them and for you, is not control. It's truth. No one walks into manipulation knowingly. You don't wake up one morning and think, "Let me let someone twist my reality today." It doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, softly, like fog rolling into a room. You don't even realize you're choking until your lungs are full of silence. Manipulation doesn't begin with control. It begins with charm, with flattery, with someone who sees you so intensely, it feels like love. But Carl Jung would say, if it feels like they see into your soul too soon, they're not reading your soul. They're reading your wounds. Let's talk about why manipulation works. It works because it mirrors your unmet needs. If you grew up starving for affection, they'll shower you with affection until you can't live without it. If you grew up walking on eggshells, They'll make you feel safe at first, then quietly punish you for stepping out of line. If you grew up needing to prove your worth, they'll create situations where you always feel like you owe them something. It's not random. It's patterned, calculated, and deeply psychological. The manipulator doesn't give you what you truly need. They give you what you've always craved. Just enough to keep you coming back. Just enough to make you stay. But here's what we miss. They don't love you. They love your compliance, your silence, your emotional flexibility. They love that you try harder when they withdraw, that you apologize first, even when you're not wrong, that you start believing everything is your fault. You think you're healing them, fixing them, helping them open up. But you're just spinning in a web where the more you love them, the less you recognize yourself. Let's make this real. Imagine this. You say, "Hey, I felt hurt when you said that." And they reply with, "You're always so sensitive. I didn't mean it like that. Why are you attacking me?" Now suddenly, you're defending yourself. Not for what you said, but for how you feel. That's the game. You bring up a boundary. They make it about your character. You express hurt. They position themselves as the victim. It's subtle. It's strategic. And it's meant to disarm you. Because if you feel guilty for feeling, they never have to take responsibility for what they did. Carl Jung called this psychic possession. It's when someone else's emotional energy occupies your inner space so deeply that you start seeing yourself through their eyes. You start to wonder, am I too much? Maybe I am overreacting. Maybe they do love me. I just need to be more patient. And so you shrink, and you wait, and you give them more grace, until you forget that love is supposed to feel like freedom, not like tiptoeing through a minefield. Let's talk about the most manipulative weapon of all, selective kindness. One moment, they're cold, distant, passive-aggressive. Then the next day, a random text, a soft apology, a tender gesture, and suddenly your anger melts. They never actually said, "I was wrong." They just reactivated your hope. Hope is the bait. And they know it. They know exactly how much warmth to offer, to erase the days of shots, guilt, or control. And you, who crave peace, will take that small act of kindness as proof that maybe, just maybe, this time they care. But it's not love. It's survival instinct. For them and for you. So why do we stay? Because part of us believes we're the problem. The manipulator doesn't just control your choices. They rewire your self-perception. You no longer ask, "Is this healthy?" You ask, "What did I do wrong this time? How can I make them happy again? Maybe I'm just not trying hard enough." This is the cycle Jung warned us about. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The manipulator hides in that unconscious space. They use your empathy against you, and they convince you that leaving them is betrayal. That's the final lie. That walking away is cold. That protecting yourself is cruel. So you stay. Not because it's good, but because you don't want to be the bad one. But here's the twist. You're not bad for wanting to be treated well. You're not selfish for wanting your voice to matter. And you're not cold for wanting distance from someone who bends reality every time they feel insecure. In fact, the moment you consider leaving is the moment you start waking up. And when you finally do walk away, they'll panic. They'll say, "You changed. You're heartless. After everything I did for you?" But what they really mean is, you stopped being controllable. You stopped bending. You're no longer scared of losing me. And that terrifies them, because they never expected you to see through them, to outgrow their tactics, to realize that love shouldn't hurt this much. So let's bring it back to Jung. True healing begins when you confront the part of you that thought manipulation was normal, that thought love had to be earned, that thought silence was safer than self-respect. You don't need to fix them. You need to find yourself. And the scariest part isn't losing them. It's realizing you were never allowed to fully exist in the first place. It's easy to hate the manipulator, to call them toxic, to walk away with anger in your chest and scars on your self-esteem. And sometimes you should. But Carl Jung had a warning for us. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Because here's the truth. Most people won't tell you. Manipulators aren't born. They're made. And often, they don't even know they're doing it. They think they're surviving. Because the manipulator is, at their core, a deeply wounded child. Let's go to their past. Most manipulators were once helpless. They might have grown up in chaos, a household where expressing needs meant punishment, where love came with conditions, where they had to read people's moods like weather patterns and adapt just to feel safe. So they learned to control others, not because they're evil, but because it was the only way to protect themselves. As adults, they don't seek connection. They seek control, because control feels like safety. They don't communicate. They orchestrate, not because they're monsters, but because they never learned how to feel safe, being honest. This doesn't excuse their behavior, but it explains their wiring. Jung would call this the repetition compulsion of the shadow. You repeat the harm you've never healed from until you destroy others or yourself. Let's break this down. The manipulator often has a fear of abandonment, a deep need to feel superior, a belief that vulnerability equals weakness, an inability to sit with emotional discomfort, a history of being emotionally neglected or parentified. So what do? They build armor out of intelligence, charm, and control. They master tone, timing, and guilt. They shape reality so that no one ever gets too close to to their actual pain. Because underneath all the tactics, there's shame. An unspoken belief. If I don't control everything, they'll see how broken I really am. So they micromanage your words. They twist your emotions. They deflect responsibility. Not to hurt you, but to avoid seeing themselves. Let's take a pause here. What does this mean for you? It means you might love someone who manipulates, but that doesn't mean you're meant to stay. You can feel their pain. You can understand their fear. You can wish they would change. But until they choose to confront their shadow, until they choose truth over control, they will continue to project their suffering onto you. And love will feel like a performance you're never allowed to stop. Jung said, "People will do anything to avoid facing their own soul." And the manipulator does this daily, through you. But what if you're the manipulator? What if, as you listened to this, you saw yourself? Not the abusive kind, not the obvious kind, but the one who guilt trips instead of asking directly, hints instead of says rewards, silence, punishes, discomfort, plays nice to avoid confrontation, controls people through care. Then let this be your mirror, because it's not too late. Jung's concept of shadow work is not about shame. It's about wholeness. To admit, yes, I manipulate because I'm afraid. That's where healing begins. When you name the shadow, it loses power. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to fix it all at once. But you do need to stop controlling people to avoid being vulnerable. Because real connection isn't control. It's consent. It's trust. It's honesty, even when it's messy. Let's talk about how to protect yourself from manipulators without becoming a cold or cynical. Because after you've been manipulated, you start to shut down. You stop trusting kindness. You see every compliment as a setup. You assume everyone has a hidden motive. But Jung would say, the healthy soul does not eliminate the shadow. It learns to live beside it. You don't need to become heartless to protect your heart. You just need to stay awake. Here's how. Set boundaries before things feel wrong. Pay attention to how people react to your honesty. Don't over-explain your decisions to people who don't honor them. Walk away. When someone makes your reality feel negotiable, reflect on what wounds in you kept you hooked to manipulation. Because it's not just about avoiding them. It's about healing the parts of you that accepted that treatment. Manipulators don't just exploit people. They find people who were trained to tolerate exploitation. Final truth, Mawa. You can love someone and still need to leave. You can see their wounds and still protect yourself. You can forgive them and still never let them back in. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. Because the longer you stay in someone else's control, the more you lose access to your own soul. And no relationship is worth that. Carl Jung's entire philosophy was built around one idea. Become who you are. And you cannot become who you are while being reshaped by someone else's fear. So here's your final reminder. If someone uses guilt as a leash, cut the leash. If someone confuses manipulation with love, let them keep the confusion. You were not born to perform. You were not created to be controlled. And you were not put on this earth to please the fragile ego of someone who fears your freedom. You were made to see clearly, to feel deeply, to walk away when the price of staying is your peace. If this video made you question everything, that's the beginning of clarity. Whether you've been manipulated or realized you were the one doing it. This isn't about blame. It's about finally facing the shadow. So now, I'll ask you, have you ever used love as a way to stay in control, even if you didn't mean to? Or have you ever mistaken manipulation for love because you were afraid to be alone? Drop your story in the comments. Let's unmask this together. And if this video hit hard, like it. Subscribe to Psychatic. And if you want to support more raw, uncomfortable truths like this, consider dropping a super thanks. Because the only way out of manipulation is into yourself.